Listen, can you hear it? Underneath the vibrant chatter of the Tenochtitlan marketplace, beneath the laughter of children and the calls of merchants selling brilliant feathers and polished jade, a sound, a deep, relentless pulse. Thump, thump, thump. It seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a heartbeat inside your own chest. It's the heartbeat of the city, or maybe the heartbeat of a hungry god. The sun is a crushing weight, the air a sweet and sickening cocktail. You smell the perfume of a million flowers spilling from floating gardens and the sharp mineral tang of the Great Lake. But underneath it all, another scent begins to rise. The cloying smoke of copal incense, so heavy it feels like it's coating your lungs. And fainter still, a coppery tang on the wind that you try not to name. The drumbeat grows louder, more insistent, and the city begins to change. The vibrant chaos slows, heads turn, and a single, unified purpose settles over tens of thousands of people. There is no panic. This isn't a call to arms, it's a summons. The crowd isn't running, it's flowing, pulled like an inexorable tide towards the source of the sound. The Great Pyramid, the Templo Maya, a man-made mountain of stone that tears a hole in the sky. And then you see them, a line of figures crawling up the impossibly steep staircase. The priests are the stuff of nightmares, draped in black, their hair matted into stiff ropes with the blood of countless offerings past. But they are not the ones who hold your gaze. Your eyes are fixed on the person they lead. A captive warrior in his prime, his body painted with sacred symbols. A young woman chosen for her flawless beauty. They are dressed not as a prisoner, but as a living deity, adorned with shimmering feathers and gold. They walk with a strange, serene dignity, as if they are the most important person in this city of a million souls. Because for these few moments, they reach the summit, a flat, blood-stained platform against the blinding blue sky. And then, silence. Absolute. The drum stops. The collective breath of the city is held. A million people watch as the figure is laid back over a carved stone altar. One of the black-robed priests raises a hand. In it is a knife, not of metal, but of flint, its edge chipped to a wicked sharpness. This isn't murder. This isn't justice. In their minds, this is a feeding, a necessary sacred payment on a cosmic debt. What is about to happen here, in full view of the heavens and the earth, represents one of the most disturbing, yet fundamental practices that bound together some of history's greatest civilizations. The belief that the gods and the universe itself thirsted for royal and human blood. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand why a king would pierce his own tongue with a stingray spine, or why a great empire would sacrifice its most perfect children on a frozen mountaintop, you must first understand their universe. For the civilizations of ancient Mesoamerica, the Olmec, the Maya, the Aztec, and for others like the Inca in the south, the world was not a stable, self-sustaining machine. It was a fragile, living entity born from a violent, sacrificial act by the gods themselves. According to the Aztec creation myth, the gods had to throw themselves into a great fire to become the sun and the moon. The sun, Huitzilopochtli, was therefore born from sacrifice, and he was engaged in a constant daily battle against the forces of darkness. To make his journey across the sky each day and to rise again the next morning, he needed energy, he needed nourishment, and the most potent nourishment, the precious water, or chalchihuatl, was human blood. This wasn't a metaphor, it was cosmic physics. Without this fuel, the sun would falter, the crops would fail, the world would be plunged into eternal darkness, and the skeletal star demons, the Tzitzimime, would descend to devour all of humanity. So, human sacrifice wasn't an act of cruelty for its own sake. It was an act of preservation. It was the ultimate responsibility of humankind to maintain the balance of the cosmos. And if all human blood was precious, the blood of the elite, of nobles, priests, and kings, was exponentially more valuable. A king, known as a Tlatoani to the Aztecs or an Ahau to the Maya, was not just a political leader. He was the chief intermediary between the mortal and divine realms. His blood was a direct conduit to the gods. What makes this particularly disturbing is how deeply this belief was woven into the fabric of society from birth. A child born into a royal family was not simply raised to rule, they were raised to bleed. From a young age, they would witness the rituals. They would learn the sacred calendar that dictated when and how the gods needed to be fed. The system was designed to create a person who saw this duty not as a horror, but as their highest, most sacred purpose. By the time a Mayan prince reached adulthood, the idea of perforating his own body to offer blood to a long-dead ancestor was as normal as a European prince learning the art of swordplay. Something that seems to us like self-mutilation was to them a profound act of piety and power. This wasn't a secret, shameful act hidden in a dark cellar. It was the central public spectacle of their culture, performed on the highest platforms, celebrated in their art, and recorded in their holy books. It was the price of civilization. But this personal piety was only the beginning. As empires grew, so did the thirst of the gods they worshipped. The Maya of the Classic period, from roughly 250 to 900 AD, provide our first window into this world. Long before the Aztecs built their great capital, the Maya were raising magnificent cities of stone in the jungles of modern-day Mexico and Guatemala. Their kings and queens were shamanistic rulers, and their primary duty was to perform the rituals that guaranteed the world's continuation. The most common of these was personal bloodletting, or auto-sacrifice. Imagine a queen, like the famous Lady Zoc of the city of Yaxchilan. On a stela dated to October 28, 709 AD, we see her kneeling before her husband, the king. She holds a bowl containing a rope, studded with the razor-sharp spines of a stingray. In a moment of intense religious ecstasy, likely aided by hallucinogenic substances, she would pull this gruesome cord through a perforation in her own tongue. The pain would have been excruciating, a searing white fire in her mouth. But in the Mayan worldview, pain was a gateway. It was a vehicle to the supernatural realm, the Xibalba. According to court records inscribed on stone lintels, the blood she shed was collected on sheets of paper made from bark. These blood-soaked papers were then burned as an offering. As the smoke rose, the supplicant would have a vision. On lintel 25, from Yaxchilan, we see the result of Lady Zoc's offering. From the rising smoke, a great vision serpent materializes, its mouth wide open. From the serpent's maw emerges the figure of a warrior, an ancestral spirit, summoned by her sacrifice. This was not a symbolic act. To her, it was real. She had literally opened a portal to the spirit world with her own pain and blood. Kings would do the same, often targeting other parts of their bodies. Glyphs from the period describe rulers piercing their ears, their cheeks, and even their own genitals in these rituals, all to repay the blood debt to the gods who created them. A Venetian ambassador visiting the region centuries later, long after the classic Maya collapse, noted, with a mixture of horror and fascination, that local lords still practiced these rites in secret, believing it was the only thing holding their broken world together. This was the baseline, the personal cost of power. But what happened next was even more disturbing. As cities vied for dominance, the gods began to demand more than just the blood of their own rulers. They wanted the blood of their enemies. By the 14th and 15th centuries, the Aztec Empire had risen to become the dominant power in Mesoamerica. Their worldview was a darker, more demanding evolution of these older traditions. Their patron god, Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war, was insatiable. Personal bloodletting by the emperor was still practiced, but it was a mere appetizer. The main course had to be a steady stream of captured warriors. This need gave rise to one of history's strangest institutions, the Xochiaoyotl, or Flower War. These were not wars of conquest in the traditional sense. While the Aztecs certainly expanded their empire through military force, the Flower Wars were ceremonial battles pre-arranged between the Aztecs and their rivals, like the city-state of Tlaxcala. The objective wasn't to gain territory or slaughter the enemy on the field. The goal was to capture high-status enemy warriors alive. A warrior who managed to capture an opponent was granted immense prestige. The captive, in a twisted way, was also honored. He was not thrown in a dungeon. According to the Florentine Codex, a 16th century ethnographic study compiled by the Spanish friar Bernardino de Sahagún, a prized captive was often treated as a celebrity for a period of time. He would be housed in a temple, given fine food and clothes, and attended by servants. He was seen as a divine messenger, a vessel of precious energy destined for the sun god. Then came the day of the ceremony. The captive would be painted and adorned in the finery of a god. He would be led up the 114 steps of the Templo Mayor. Can you imagine that final walk? The sound of the roaring crowd below, a sound not of anger, but of religious fervor. The smell of incense and drying blood. The sight of the two temples at the summit, one blue for the rain, god Tlaloc, one red and white for the war god Huitzilopochtli. At the top, he would be held down over the sacrificial stone by 4 priests. A 5th would approach with a knife of obsidian or flint. The procedure was swift and clinical. An incision was made below the rib cage, and the priest would reach into the chest cavity to sever the aorta and remove the still beating heart. The heart, the precious eagle cactus fruit, was held up to the sun before being placed in a ceremonial vessel. The body was then rolled down the steps of the pyramid. This was not a rare event. Some historians, relying on Aztec accounts, suggest that for major events, like the dedication of the Templo Mayor in 1487, thousands of captives could be sacrificed over a period of 4 days. While these numbers are debated by modern scholars, the archaeological evidence is undeniable. Piles of skulls have been found near the temple precinct, many showing the telltale marks of this procedure. This was a state-sponsored, industrial-scale system of ritual killing, all designed to keep the sun in the sky. It was a terrifying fusion of church, state, and war. But the truth was far darker than anyone imagined. For certain gods, the blood of a strong warrior was not what they desired. For them, the ultimate offering was innocence. The rain god, Tlaloc, was one of the most revered and feared deities in the Aztec pantheon. He could bring the rains that nourished the corn, the lifeblood of the empire. But he could also bring devastating droughts or floods. Appeasing him required a very specific kind of sacrifice: children. The logic was as poetic as it was horrifying. The tears of young, innocent children were seen as sympathetic magic, a symbol of the rain they so desperately needed. Therefore, the more the children cried on their way to the altar, the more auspicious the sacrifice was considered. According to contemporary accounts, children for these rituals were either purchased from their parents or chosen from the nobility. They were often selected for specific physical traits, like having 2 cowlicks in their hair, which was thought to resemble the eddies of a whirlpool. One witness, a Spanish friar, writing in the years after the conquest, described the processions. The children were dressed in elaborate costumes, adorned with paper wings and precious jewels, and carried in litters decorated with flowers and feathers. They were paraded through the city to the sound of flutes and trumpets. It was a festival, but the witnesses also noted the sounds of the children weeping and the grim satisfaction this brought the priests. Archaeological discoveries have confirmed these chilling accounts. In the offerings buried beneath the Templo Mayor in modern-day Mexico City, Archaeologists have found the remains of dozens of children, many between the ages of 4 and 6. Forensic analysis of their bones shows they were often suffering from painful ailments like dental abscesses, which may have been intentionally left untreated to ensure they would be crying in pain. They were sacrificed at several key times of the year, sometimes at shrines on sacred mountains, where their small bodies were left in caves, or at the temple itself, where they would be killed by priests. Imagine the psychological state of a parent in this society. To have your child chosen could be seen as a great honor, a sign that your family was contributing to the survival of the world. But it was an honor built on an unbearable foundation of grief. This was a system that demanded the ultimate sacrifice from its people. Yet, it was what happened in the distant Andes Mountains that would haunt historians forever. Far to the south, another great empire flourished, the Inca of Peru. Theirs was a world of windswept mountains and high-altitude deserts. Like the Aztecs, their emperor, the Sapa Inca, was considered a living god, a son of the sun god Inti. And they too practiced human sacrifice, but in a form that was somehow both less violent and more chilling. It was called capacocha. The capacocha was a ritual performed to mark momentous occasions, a victory in battle, the death of an emperor, or to ward off a natural disaster like a volcanic eruption. For this, the empire demanded its most perfect offering. Messengers were sent out to all corners of the vast empire, from modern-day Colombia to Chile. Their task was to select perfect, unblemished children, typically between the ages of 6 and 15. They had to be physically flawless, with perfect teeth, clear skin, and long, straight hair. Crucially, they were chosen from noble families. To have your child selected for the capacocha was the highest honor a family could receive. It meant your bloodline was pure enough to join the gods, and your family would be elevated in status for generations. These chosen children were not treated as victims, they were treated as living deities. One girl, whose frozen body was discovered by archaeologists in 1999 near the summit of Mount Ampato, gives us a haunting glimpse into this practice. We call her the Ice Maiden, or Juanita. Analysis of her hair revealed her diet changed dramatically in the year before her death. She began eating elite food like maize and llama meat, indicating she had been chosen. She and other chosen children would be brought to the capital city of Cusco. There, they would be honored in great feasts, meeting the Sapa Inca himself. They were showered with gifts of fine textiles and gold figurines. Then, the final journey began. The children, accompanied by priests and family members, would walk for weeks or even months to a designated high-altitude shrine on one of the empire's sacred mountain peaks, or apus. These were some of the highest mountains in the world, towering over 20,000 feet. The air is thin, the cold is brutal, the landscape is utterly alien. As they climbed, the children were given coca leaves to chew to ward off altitude sickness and fatigue. Upon reaching the summit, a small stone structure had been built. A final ceremony was held. The children were given a last meal and a large amount of chicha, a strong alcoholic maize beer. This, combined with the altitude and the cold, would induce a deep, intoxicated sleep. They were not stabbed or beaten. They were simply placed gently in a seated position in their small stone tomb, surrounded by offerings of pottery and precious metals, and left to freeze to death. What modern psychologists would recognize as a calculated process of dissociation and sedation, the Inca saw as a peaceful transition. The child was not dying. They were becoming a guardian spirit of the mountain, a divine emissary to the gods. Forensic evidence from Juanita and other ice mummies confirms this. There are no signs of violence. They simply went to sleep. In that moment, something fundamental broke from our modern perspective. A child, drunk and disoriented, shivering in the oxygen-starved air, was lulled into their own death, believing it was the greatest moment of their life. The screams that echoed through the Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan were horrifying, but the silence on the peak of Ampato is perhaps even more profound. It is the sound of a culture so completely unified in its belief that it could transform the ultimate act of cruelty into an act of supreme piety. So far, we have seen rulers offering their own blood, and empires offering the blood of their enemies, their commoners, and even their own noble children. But what of the rulers themselves? Did their divine status grant them immunity from the final price? The answer is a definitive no. In the brutal politics of ancient America, a king's royal blood made him not a protected species, but the ultimate prize. For the Maya, the capture of an enemy king was the single greatest achievement of warfare. We see this recorded triumphantly on their monuments. Stela 12 from the city of Piedras Negras, dated to 795 AD, shows the ruler of that city standing over a collection of captive lords from a rival city. They are stripped, bound, and awaiting their fate. The fate of a captured king was often to be the centerpiece of a massive public ritual. This wasn't just an execution, it was a cosmic event. What happened next has been debated by historians for centuries, but the evidence points to a combination of ritual humiliation and sacrifice. Some scholars believe that high-stakes versions of the famous Mesoamerican ball game were played, where the captured king would be forced to play for his life. In this version, however, the game was rigged, and the king's defeat was a foregone conclusion. According to some interpretations of the game's symbolism, the losing captain, in this case, the captive king, would be decapitated. His head, representing the sun or moon, was the ultimate offering. Other accounts, from both Maya art and Aztec codices, depict a more drawn-out process. A captured ruler might be tortured over a period of days, his humiliation a public spectacle to demonstrate the power of his captors and their gods. He might be forced to participate in a gladiatorial-style combat, tied to a stone and given inferior weapons to fight against elite warriors until he was finally overcome. In that final moment, the king made the only choice that was truly their own: to die with the dignity his station demanded. He was no longer just a man. He was a conduit for the transfer of sacred energy. His death didn't just eliminate a rival, it was believed to literally feed his conqueror's empire and weaken the gods of his own people. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the early 16th century, they were appalled by these practices, which they saw as the work of the devil. Yet their own actions, driven by a lust for gold and a different kind of religious fervor, would bring about a level of destruction that dwarfed even the Aztecs' most bloody rituals, wiping out not just thousands, but millions, through disease, warfare, and enslavement. So what are we to make of all this? How do we look back at these grand civilizations, the masterful astronomers, the brilliant architects, the sophisticated artists, and reconcile their achievements with these acts of systematic, ritualized killing? It's easy to dismiss them as savage or evil, but that would be a disservice to the truth. The story of royal and human sacrifice is a terrifying reminder of the power of belief. These weren't societies that delighted in cruelty. They were societies gripped by a profound and ever-present anxiety. They believed they lived on a knife's edge, in a universe that could collapse at any moment, and that only their constant, bloody vigilance held the darkness at bay. The long-term consequence of this belief system was a cycle of escalating violence. As empires grew, their gods became hungrier, demanding more and more elaborate sacrifices, which in turn required more warfare, creating a feedback loop of blood and conquest. When the system finally shattered, either through internal collapse like the classic Maya, or external conquest like the Aztec and Inca, the central pillar of their reality was gone. The sun kept rising without their help, the rain kept falling. The universe, it turned out, did not need their blood to survive. What makes the story of a girl like Juanita, the Ice Maiden, so haunting isn't just the abuse, but the honor that surrounded it. What makes the story of a captive warrior on the Aztec altar so tragic is the possibility that he too, a product of the same culture, may have accepted his fate as necessary. We know almost nothing about who these people were before they became offerings. We don't know their names, their dreams, their fears. They have been reduced to archaeological specimens or footnotes in a Spanish chronicle. Behind every historical narrative of imperial grandeur, From the pyramids of Egypt to the Great Wall of China, there are individual human stories of suffering and sacrifice that have been silenced by the march of time. Perhaps most tragically, these rituals show us that the most horrific acts in history are often committed not by monsters, but by ordinary people who believe they are doing what is necessary to save their world. The practice of royal blood sacrifice did not survive the conquest of the Americas. It vanished, along with the gods who demanded it. But the memory lingers, preserved in stone, in codices, and in the frozen bodies of children on lonely mountaintops. They are not just historical curiosities. They are a testament to the fact that these were real people, living in a world governed by a terrifying and sacred logic. Their story reminds us that the line between civilization and barbarism, between piety and cruelty, is often thinner than we dare to admit, a truth that echoes even across the vast gulf of centuries. What do you think is the most unsettling aspect of these ancient rituals? The willing participation of the victims, the cold logic of the priests, or the public celebration of the events? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to continue exploring the hidden, often disturbing truths of our shared past, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the heart of ancient darkness.